Hello everyone, I'm so glad you could join me here at Red Pine Quilt Shop in Detroit Lakes, Minnesota. I'm Connie, and today I want to share with you the pattern Ditto, this cheerful, bright quilt, and also the rulers and how to use them. One of the key things for this quilt to really be stunning is care in your fabric choice and in the fabric placement. These fabrics need to have enough contrast so that you have a real strong diagonal pattern, and also where they've been placed. This particular quilt, Ditto, is not going to work with large multicolor fabrics. These diagonals are going to be lost if you have that big print. So again, the fabric choice and placement is really important with this quilt. As always, Jaybird Quilts has thorough directions. They're detailed. She's also supported online, so you can go there to look for directions. So these rulers, the Jumbo Lazy Angle and the Lazy Angle ruler, you could use either of these in the quilt. If you chose not to buy a ruler, the pattern does have a template that you could trace and use yourself. So let's take a look at the ruler. I have this one opened. You notice that you could make from a 1.5 inch to an 8.5 inch. It's clearly marked with all of the inches and the lines. And one thing that I really liked about this ruler, you notice I flipped it because sometimes you have to do that, is that, now I'm upside down here, that we do have the measurements written on the back side so you can read them. This is a Creative Grids ruler, so it does have those grips on the back. Leave it down. And this one does not, so you could add those grips on the back of this ruler if you like to use those. So let me show you how to use this. I'm using 5.5 inch strips today. They are cut with the fabric, so it's double. Now the advantage to having it be double is that I'm going to be cutting a left and a right piece at the same time. First I need to get rid of this selvage. So I'll cut that off. Now in the directions for this quilt top, she does tell you be sure that you cut the large A pieces first. Now you notice I'm using the 5.5 inch. I'm using these ruler stickers. Makes it very easy. I've got this lined up. And there's one. Now I'm rotating 180 degrees. You notice that 5.5 inch right here? You line it up and cut again. I would cut all of these A pieces before I went on to cut the B pieces. Again, you notice that I have a left and a right piece because I am doing the doubles at the same time. Now I'm going to cut the B pieces. These are the smaller ones. So I'm again lining it up here and the 5.5 inch. I'm going to, now this time I'm flipping the ruler and I'm going to go over to here, and you notice that I have the 5.5. I can read that, it's not upside down. And there I have those pieces. This would be the B piece, the A piece. I have the right and the left section of it. So that's how you cut with this ruler. This ruler could cut anything from 1.5 up to 8.5 inches. This ruler could cut anything from 1.5 to 6.5. Both of them will work for this pattern. Now let's talk a little bit about how to put these blocks together. Now the pattern talks about bow ties. And what they mean by the bow ties are these little angles. You see, here's a bow tie, and here's a bow tie. Now, I did play with this a little bit to kind of get just at the right angle, but the bow tie, the intersection should be where your seam is. I've had some issues with stretching on the bias, so I like to use a seam roller, and I would just roll it. I am going to press these seams open, but for right now, I wanted to not distort it. You notice here that this is flat across the top. If yours is not flat, you're not going to end up with a 5.5 inch square. Now, I did check, I'd sew a couple, and then I'd check them. So I'm using any square ruler, and I'm here at the 5.5. And that one's quite good for 5.5. I would check the next one. And I really did check them to be sure that they were accurate. The pattern does tell you if it's not 5.5, get out your seam ripper, tear it, and sew it again. So whatever you do to be sure that your seams are 1/4 inch, do that. And then check, be careful with your pressing. And then once you have these squares put together, it's going to be really easy to assemble the quilt. It sort of felt like she was my mom telling me, check it, take it out if it's not right. I thought that was kind of funny. So these blocks are A and B. I have to kind of turn around here to, there. So this is the A block, and it's the right block, because I could make my R in there and it kind of worked. And this would be the left. Now that's important because you're going to have many sets of these. Now, as I cut my pieces, I did label them. I had like the 1-2 or the 7-1. Now you wonder, what do those mean? This little key, which will be included in the kit for the fabrics here. So this one was a large 1 and a small 2. This B1 was a small 7 with a large 1. I did this for all of the different blocks that I did, and I had them set out exactly like the pattern showed me. I did this exactly the way she had it set up. It was kind of interesting that the right blocks were on the left side and the left blocks were on the right side, but I just did this so that I could refer to the pattern. And then when I started setting out the blocks, I used this that came with the kit that matches up these fabrics and matched it with these. Before I keep going on, let me show you what happens if you don't sew these together correctly. So look at this one. Obviously my bow ties are off, and when I turn it, look how that top is definitely off. You want the top seam to be even. That's going to be your first clue that you need to tear it out, is if it's not even, there's no way you're going to get a 5.5 inch square. This is what we're shooting for. This is what we're trying to avoid. So, as I said, I laid out all of my squares just like this. I labeled them. Space is kind of at I don't have a lot of it in my sewing room. So I laid out about four lines here. Started at the 4, did 4 of them on the bed, left them there, and I was really careful because I wanted to start this out and not have any of the blocks flipped and not have any colors put in the wrong place. Now once I sewed these 4 strips together, it was pretty easy to continue the pattern. But again, I kept these labeled and exactly in the stack, and I referred to both the pattern and also to the fabric placement key. I ran out of room. I had my squares stacked. I had the strips laid out on the bed, and it was like, well, where am I going to press? And I decided I would have my squares underneath. I took a large mat and I just covered them with the mat, and then I was able to press. And when it was time for me to go to the blocks, I could just move the mat off, and there were the squares and the blocks. Kind of gave me a little extra room without having to move anything around. It isn't difficult to put this together, but check your placement and check it again. That way you know you're going to end up with exactly what you're looking for. So some of the tools that were really helpful to me, obviously the rulers, the stickers for the rulers, seam rollers. That has really helped me to prevent stretching and distorting my block. Seam rippers, doesn't matter what kind you use, just have one handy. While pressing, I really did like to use some sort of a stylus that I could press with. Most of these blocks I chain pieced, so any sort of thread trimmer that you could use for chain piecing. And I had a 10-inch square, but you don't need a 10-inch. Anything that's 5.5 inches or greater is going to work. So you can square up and be certain that your blocks are 5.5 inches. Well, buying a ruler is an investment, and I always want that investment to have several uses. So there are different blocks you can make right here. You don't even really have to go online. But Julie Herman at Jaybird Quilts does have several that she's going to discuss and how to use these two rulers, different blocks. I just looked at a couple of the examples and look how I could put this one together. Now if you notice, I ran out of the background. I just inserted another low volume. Here's another one where I put the color with the small B piece. Another example of the same block. Now not only can I make a lot of different blocks with this, I can make different sizes. So if you wanted to, you could do an 8.5 inch square, which would end up being 16 inches finished, if that's what you wanted to do. Table topper, something like that. Lots of choices. There are also a lot of patterns that would use this same blocks. And here is a book by Joan Hawley, and she originally did the lazy angle ruler. Lots of different patterns. Now some of these you make your original square and then cut it again, and then you would end up having a different square, different block. So I think this is a great ruler. It's a fun pattern. I think this quilt is going to be really fun. I can't wait to take it to the long armor. I'm going to ask her to play with the colors, do some custom quilting, kind of emphasize the diagonal, and probably use different colors. I think that'll be pretty on the backside. So again, you can have lots of fun. This Ditto kit will be available on the website soon, and it will include the fabric placement key along with the pattern. So watch for that. So just some tips. You can have great success and have a wonderful quilt. Fabric selection and placement. Be really careful with your sewing, your 1/4 inch seams, your pressing. Check to be sure you have 5.5 inch squares. And stay organized. Label those stacks. Take your time and check and be sure that you have the blocks placed correctly as you do the first few strips, and the rest will fall into place. No questions. So I'm so glad you could join me today, and I hope you can have some fun with the lazy angle ruler or with the Ditto pattern. Happy sewing.